So you can see on the first page, some of you are lucky you have color, the rest of you don't. That's okay, you can pretend we're in the 50s for a while. I was playing the piano. I spent a lot of time building little cities with Lego, etc. I was reading novels by age of 3. I think C.S. Lewis' Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe was the first one I read, and then Magician's Nephew was the second one I read. So by the time I went to school at the age of 5, I was already out of place, but I didn't know that I was out of place. I was just wondering why they were teaching other people my age to read the clock. And I thought, why are you doing? Is this some sort of joke? Why are we doing this? This is something you learn when you're 1.5. Come on, everyone knows that. Now, the problem is by saying that, of course, I've now come to learn that that is taken by neurotypicals as someone being egotistical. And so you can get cold coffee. Cold coffee is good because it makes my speech sound better in my mind. So I don't remember what I was saying. Oh, the egotistical thing. So at school, the first time it happened was my second grade teacher, assuming that I was actually being a smart ARSE, when in fact that's not the case at all. There's no need in my mind to blame them. I'm not saying anyone would, but I definitely don't blame them. They didn't know any better, and so from their perspective it will look like that. And I've come to learn very recently that how things quote unquote look can be very different to different people, even if it's the same situation, which is quite amazing. So it started to occur between say 12 and 15 where I would actually tell the students that I was an idiot in advance to save them hurling that abuse at me on a daily basis, and let them know that I acknowledge that that was the truth and we all understand that so we can move on. I've told this story 100 times, but why not say it again? 101. In 1993, when the teacher asked, put your hand up if you think Gabe was an idiot, the whole class put up their hand and that type of stuff. But once again, I don't blame the teacher. It's something that they honestly thought it was the right thing to do. And if anyone has any autistic children, you can probably see that from a naive perspective, they might just look like they're being a pain, when in fact they just might be struggling with too much information, too much sound going across their mind. I don't know what it is on yours, but on page 4 or 5, there's some photos I have of these alpine and / Mediterranean sections. You can see some white snow, you can see some beautiful Mediterranean Sea, there's a huge basilica and cathedral and a statue of Mary, and as well as a mosque. And in 1987, my parents took me to my father's homeland of the Lebanese mountains, which are a continuation of the Alps from Europe down into the Mediterranean just north of Israel. And it was during the Civil War, so we had to go on a boat in order to avoid the airport that was taken over by some small group at the time. It was interesting because upon arriving there were people that were friends with me just by the grace of them being my family. So apparently because they're my family, they had to be nice to me. So that was interesting because it was the first time that people would actually want to interact with me personally. And it was almost like the disease of leprosy or whatever it was that I had for 5 years of my life that I could remember at that time, or 4 years, which is a long time. I mean, it takes less time to get a degree. So basically I had a degree in knowing I was repellent somehow at that age. And you think it's gone. So what you do, of course, as any child will do, is think that that land, that place must be magical. That's the place that cured my leprosy. But when I came back to Australia, it came back again. But the funny thing is that the first day I came back, I was in first grade, and the repellence was not there. What happened was that the students were all around me, and they were asking me questions about their country. And I was able to, of course, articulate my responses in sort of a similar pattern to the way I might today, maybe 60% of the level I have today. And I noticed that kids, now if I look back in my mind, I can see that their eyes were glazing over, sort of like what happens if you force young people right now to sit there for 3 seconds. So I noticed that whatever this cure to a repellent nature that I possessed had come back with me, but it only survived a day. Sort of like if you take ice out of a freezer, it starts to melt. That's how I noticed that, but what I also noticed was an exponential decrease. It's now something, it's called Matthew's Law. I wasn't able to articulate it back then, but I realized that it was the same mathematical law that was happening with people waiting for lunch at the tuck shop, where if you wanted to have the shortest time waiting in the line, the shortest time from halfway through lunch to the end, there's much more chance of getting that as opposed to being in the first half of lunch. So it decreases exponentially. I've got some facial expressions down here. Happy, eyebrows are raised, eyes are open, and the smile is curved at both sides in line with the eyes above the 180 degree line. And because they're all happening simultaneously, like what's happening with Fiona, Rowena. All right. We can officially record that as me being embarrassed. Rowena has, at the moment, a nice smile on her face. Sometimes you can see if you have the bottom half of the face performing that movement, but the eyes are not. Immediately, I think it's disingenuous, but I'm not sure exactly why yet until I hear more of the conversation around it. Now, this can cause, of course, a lot of problems, and one of those problems I'll show you is tennis. Just to show my friends online, we have tennis. No, I was not flirting with Rowena. That's terrible. This is sort of a neurotypical conversation. It's sort of normal, one-on-one conversation. It's quite easy. What happens in my case is when there's a lot of people, I can't actually track the conversation. It's sort of like trying to play tennis. Oh, there's a court there, but then everyone else like throws 100 balls all at once. There's an inability to differentiate between which conversation's happening when and why. What I've come to learn, this was from 25 onwards, I learned that there is a difference between words that convey meaning and the words that have meaning themselves. It's sort of like a train and passengers. Hello, how are you? I've come to learn it's sort of like uploading to the net, like we used to do in the 90s. You have to wait for the that's hello, how are you? Hello, how are you is hello, I am engaging emotionally with you in the event that I need to ask you something that actually matters later on. So I've learned to do that. Oh, hello, how are you? Hello, how are you? And then, of course, sometimes you can do that too much. So then people say, why do you keep saying how are you to everybody? It's a lot of trial and error to get to being 37. And I do owe my ex-fiance, about 10 years ago, taught me humor when YouTube came out. So I spent a week, about 18 hours a day, watching as much comedy as I could. It sort of rubbed off about 1% of it. So I've learned now about sarcasm, as you probably have noticed.